The sheriff's deputy was walking toward my wedding altar when Linda Blackwood grabbed his arm and pointed directly at my bride. It was 3:47 p.m. on what should have been the happiest day of my life, and the HOA president was literally trying to have my wedding arrested. "Officer Martinez, these people are in violation of 17 different county ordinances," Linda shrieked, her voice cutting through the gentle acoustic guitar music like a rusty chainsaw. "This is an illegal commercial event on residential property." 300 wedding guests turned in their white folding chairs to stare at Linda, who stood at the edge of my pasture in her power suit and pearls, clutching a thick manila folder like it contained nuclear launch code. Behind her, 2 other HOA board members flanked her like backup singers in the world's most toxic girl group. My bride, Sarah, squeezed my hand tighter, her wedding dress rustling in the evening breeze as she whispered, "David, please tell me she can't actually stop our wedding." I looked at Linda Blackwood, the woman who'd spent 6 months systematically trying to destroy my ranch-style wedding plans, and smiled. She had no idea that the man whose wedding she was trying to ruin owned Heritage Valley Chapel, the historic church where she and every other HOA board member had gotten married. The same chapel where I had the power to revoke their membership, cancel their family events, and ban them from the property their entire social circle considered sacred ground. Officer Martinez looked uncomfortable as he approached our rustic wooden arch decorated with wildflowers and fairy lights. He'd probably never been called to arrest a wedding before, especially not one taking place on private property with all proper permits. "Ma'am," he said to Linda, "I'm going to need to see some documentation that this event is actually illegal." That's when Linda made her fatal mistake. She opened that manila folder and started reading from a list of violations she'd spent weeks fabricating, each one more ridiculous than the last. She was so focused on destroying my wedding that she didn't notice me pulling out my phone to record every word. Linda Blackwood thought she was delivering the knockout punch in our 6-month war. She had no idea she was about to hand me the evidence I needed to destroy her entire social world. The whole mess started 8 months earlier when I inherited my grandfather's 40-acre ranch on the outskirts of Millbrook Valley. The property was a slice of heaven, rolling pastures, mature oak trees, and a rustic barn that had been hosting family gatherings for 3 generations. My grandfather, Frank Morrison, had been a quiet man who raised cattle and minded his own business for 60 years. The ranch sat just inside the boundaries of the Millbrook Estates, HOA, but it had always been grandfathered in with agricultural exemptions that predated the subdivision by decades. I'd grown up spending summers on that ranch, learning to ride horses and helping with the cattle. When Grandpa Frank passed away, he left me the property with a simple wish: keep it in the family and keep it real. So when Sarah and I got engaged 6 months later, having our wedding on the ranch felt like destiny. We'd met at a country music festival, bonded over our love of the outdoors, and dreamed of a rustic celebration surrounded by nature instead of some sterile hotel ballroom. The ranch was perfect for it. The back pasture had natural amphitheater seating, with the barn as a backdrop. The old oak grove provided shade for cocktail hour. The front meadow was ideal for parking and guest overflow. I spent weeks planning every detail, getting proper event permits from the county, hiring caterers and musicians, designing a celebration that would honor my grandfather's memory while starting my new life with Sarah. Everything was perfect until Linda Blackwood decided to get involved. Linda had been HOA president for 3 years, running Millbrook Estates like her personal kingdom. She was the type of woman who measured her self-worth by how much control she could exert over other people's lives, and she wielded HOA regulations like weapons against anyone who dared to live differently than her vision of suburban perfection. She lived in the largest house in the subdivision, a McMansion that looked like a wedding cake exploded, and had built her entire identity around being the neighborhood's unofficial social director. Every important event, Every charity fundraiser, every community gathering had to have Linda's stamp of approval. The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday morning in March. I was planning seating arrangements when a pristine white Lexus pulled into my gravel driveway, completely out of place against the rustic backdrop of my ranch. Out stepped Linda in her signature pearls and power suit, carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. She looked around my property with obvious disgust, her nose wrinkling at the sight of genuine countryside. "Mr. Morrison," she announced without pleasantries, "I'm Linda Blackwood, president of the Millbrook Estates, HOA. I understand you're planning some kind of event on this property." I was immediately wary. Something about Linda's tone suggested this wasn't a friendly social call. "Yes, ma'am, my wedding. It's going to be beautiful. Sarah and I are so excited to celebrate here on my family's land." Linda opened her briefcase with theatrical precision and pulled out a thick stack of papers. "Mr. Morrison, I've reviewed your grandfather's property records, and I'm afraid this ranch now falls under full HOA jurisdiction. Agricultural exemptions expire with ownership transfer unless specifically renewed." My stomach dropped. I'd assumed Grandpa Frank's exemptions would transfer automatically. I haven't received any notice about needing renewals. "Are you sure?" "Quite sure," Linda interrupted, her smile turning predatory. "Which means any large gathering on this property requires HOA approval. And frankly, a wedding reception with hundreds of guests simply isn't appropriate for a residential neighborhood." That's when I realized this wasn't about regulations or exemptions. This was about control. Linda Blackwood had built her identity around being the center of Millbrook's social scene, and she couldn't tolerate the idea of a major celebration happening without her involvement. "Ma'am, this is private property, and I have every legal right to host my wedding here. If there are specific concerns about the event, I'm happy to address them." Linda's fake smile disappeared entirely. "Mr. Morrison, I don't think you understand how HOAs work. This community has standards, and those standards exist to protect everyone's property values. A ranch wedding with country music and—" She paused with visible disgust. Cattle nearby simply doesn't meet those standards. After she left, I called my lawyer, Rebecca Torres, who specialized in property rights. Her advice was frustratingly predictable. "David, HOA disputes are expensive and time-consuming. Your best bet is to work with them, maybe scale down the event or move it somewhere else." But Rebecca didn't understand what that ranch meant to my family, or what Linda Blackwood was really trying to accomplish. This wasn't about legitimate concerns. This was about a power-hungry woman who couldn't stand the idea of someone in her territory having a celebration she didn't control. I'd spent my adult life building Morrison Heritage Properties, a company that specialized in preserving historic buildings and properties. I owned venues, managed estates, and had connections throughout the event industry that went back 15 years. Linda Blackwood thought she was bullying a helpless ranch owner into canceling his wedding. She had no idea she was declaring war on someone who understood the hospitality industry better than she ever would. Linda's campaign against my wedding started with bureaucratic harassment, but escalated into something much more personal and vicious. Within a week of our first encounter, I received my first official HOA violation notice. The notice was typed on expensive letterhead and delivered by certified mail, VIOLAT, planning commercial event without HOA approval. REMED. YREQUIRAD, immediate cancellation of scheduled wedding reception or payment of $10,000 special event assessment. PENALT, Y $500 per day until compliance. I called the HOA management company, hoping there was some reasonable explanation. The woman on the phone sounded embarrassed as she explained that Linda had called an emergency board meeting and pushed through new event restrictions specifically targeting large gatherings. Mr. Morrison, honestly, this seems excessive. We handle dozens of HOAs, and I've never seen regulations this restrictive about family events on private property. But Mrs. Blackwood insists she has community support. The $10,000 assessment was clearly designed to force me to cancel the wedding. It was more than many people spend on their entire celebration, demanded as a penalty for the crime of wanting to get married on my own land. I decided to fight it and let the violation fines accumulate while I challenged the new regulations through proper legal channels. What I didn't expect was how personal Linda would make the battle. The second escalation came when Linda started showing up at my vendors' businesses, trying to convince them to cancel our contracts. She told my caterer that the event was under legal challenge and might be shut down. She warned my band that they could face fines for performing at an illegal gathering. My florist called me in tears. "David, I'm so sorry, but that HOA woman came to my shop and threatened to report me to the county for participating in unpermitted events. She scared my staff so badly that my manager wants to cancel your contract." Linda was systematically trying to destroy my wedding by intimidating everyone involved in making it happen. She was weaponizing fear and bureaucracy to force me into surrender. But her biggest mistake was targeting Sarah directly. Linda somehow got Sarah's work number and called her at the elementary school where she taught 4th grade. According to Sarah, Linda spent 20 minutes trying to convince her to call off the wedding, claiming that I was being unreasonable and litigious and that the event would damage the community. When subtle manipulation didn't work, Linda got nasty. "Miss Patterson, I hope you understand that your fiancé's selfishness is going to cost both of you a lot of money in legal fees. Wouldn't it be easier to just have a normal wedding at a proper venue?" Sarah was shaking when she called me that afternoon. "David, she made me feel like we're doing something wrong by wanting to get married on your family's ranch." She kept talking about how this was going to hurt property values and damage the neighborhood. That's when I realized Linda Blackwood had crossed the line from HOA president to full-scale bully. She was terrorizing my fiancé A at her workplace, intimidating local businesses, and using her position to wage a personal vendetta against my family. The third escalation proved that Linda's behavior was about more than just power trips. It was about money. I discovered that Linda had been quietly lobbying other HOA board members to change the community's event policies specifically to eliminate competition with Heritage Valley Chapel, the historic church that hosted most of Millbrook's upscale weddings and social events. Linda sat on the chapel's board of directors and had significant financial interests in maintaining their monopoly on local wedding venues. My ranch wedding wasn't just a violation of her control, it was a threat to her income stream. She'd turned HOA regulations into a tool for eliminating business competition, using community authority to protect her personal financial interests. It was corruption disguised as community standards. The fourth escalation came when Linda convinced the county to send building inspectors to my ranch, claiming I was constructing unpermitted structures for commercial use. She was referring to the wooden arch I'd built for our ceremony and the temporary platform for the band. The inspectors were thorough and professional, documenting that everything I'd built met safety standards and fell well within the guidelines for temporary structures on agricultural property. Their report completely vindicated my wedding plans. But Linda's response to this official vindication was to abandon any pretense of following legitimate procedures. The fifth escalation arrived with a sheriff's deputy at my door, serving me with a restraining order based on Linda's sworn testimony that I had threatened violence against HOA board members during a community meeting. Linda had committed perjury to get that restraining order, swearing under oath that I'd made threatening statements when the meeting had been recorded and the audio proved the opposite. She'd lied to a judge to weaponize the legal system against my wedding. Standing on my front porch with that restraining order in my hands, I realized Linda Blackwood wasn't just a difficult HOA president. She was a sociopath who would destroy anyone who threatened her control, and she was willing to commit crimes to do it. That's when I decided it was time to show Linda what real power looked like. That evening, instead of panicking about the restraining order, I sat in my grandfather's old office and made a series of phone calls that would change everything. The first call was to Rebecca Torres, my lawyer, who was as outraged as I was about Linda's perjury. "David, this restraining order is based on completely false testimony. We can get it thrown out easily, but I'm more concerned about the pattern of harassment. This woman is escalating dangerously. Rebecca, I need you to document everything Linda has done. The vendor intimidation, the false reports, the perjury. I want a complete legal record of her abuse of power, and I want criminal charges filed where appropriate." The second call was to my business partner, Michael Chen, who helped me manage Morrison Heritage Properties. Michael had been my best man at my first wedding and understood how important this celebration was to Sarah and me. "Mike, I need you to pull the ownership records for Heritage Valley Chapel. I want to know exactly who sits on their board, what their financial interests are, and how much influence Linda Blackwood really has there." Michael's research skills were legendary, and within an hour he'd uncovered information that made me smile for the first time in weeks. Heritage Valley Chapel wasn't just where Linda had gotten married, it was where she served as board secretary and marketing director. She'd been using her HOA position to eliminate competition and drive business to a venue where she had direct financial interests. But the most interesting discovery was that the chapel's ownership structure was more complicated than it appeared. The property was owned by Morrison Heritage Properties, my company, through a complex trust arrangement I'd inherited from my grandfather. I'd forgotten that Grandpa Frank had quietly purchased the struggling chapel 15 years earlier to prevent it from being demolished for development. He'd kept the original board structure and let them continue operating independently, but legal ownership rested with a family trust. Linda Blackwood had spent months trying to destroy my wedding to protect her interests at a chapel that I actually owned. The third call was to Sarah, who deserved to know that our wedding was about to be protected by the most poetic justice imaginable. "Honey, I need to tell you something about Heritage Valley Chapel and Linda Blackwood's real motivations. But first, I need you to trust me that our wedding is going to happen exactly as planned, no matter what Linda tries to do." Sarah had been stress-eating ice cream and researching backup venues all week, convinced that Linda might actually succeed in shutting down our celebration. "David, are you sure? Because she seems so determined to destroy this for us." Sarah, Linda Blackwood just made the biggest mistake of her life. She picked a fight with the wrong person, and she's about to learn what happens when you try to destroy something that belongs to my family. The fourth call was to James Mitchell, the chapel's current executive director, who'd been running day-to-day operations for the past 5 years. James was a good man who'd been caught in the middle of Linda's schemes without realizing the full scope of her corruption. "James, this is David Morrison. I need to schedule a meeting about Heritage Valley Chapel's board composition and some concerning conflicts of interest that have come to light. Mr. Morrison, is this about Mrs. Blackwood's complaints regarding your ranch wedding? Because I have to tell you, she's been pressuring us to take some kind of official position against competing venues." Perfect. Linda had been using the chapel's reputation to attack my wedding while hiding her financial motivations. "James, I think it's time you learned about the chapel's actual ownership structure and Mrs. Blackwood's real role in recent events." After I hung up, I spent the rest of the evening reviewing trust documents, board bylaws, and financial records that painted a clear picture of Linda's corruption. She'd been using her HOA position to eliminate business competition while personally profiting from the chapel's monopoly on upscale weddings. Tomorrow, Linda Blackwood would discover that her victim was actually her boss, and that every scheme she'd used against my wedding had been carefully documented for use against her. But tonight, I called Sarah back with the news that would make her evening, honey. Not only is our wedding going to happen exactly as planned, but Linda Blackwood is about to find out that karma has a sense of humor. The first phase of my revenge began the next morning when I walked into Heritage Valley Chapel for my scheduled meeting with James Mitchell and the board of directors. Linda was already there, sitting at the head of the conference table like she owned the place, probably planning to use the meeting to build more opposition to my wedding. She looked surprised to see me. "Mr. Morrison, I don't believe you were invited to this board meeting. This is private chapel business." James Mitchell looked uncomfortable as he shuffled through papers. "Actually, Mrs. Blackwood, Mr. Morrison requested this meeting, and given the circumstances, I felt it was appropriate to include all board members." I took a seat directly across from Linda and opened my briefcase. "Thank you, James. I think it's time everyone understood the true ownership structure of Heritage Valley Chapel and how certain board members have been abusing their positions." Linda's confident smirk faltered slightly. "What are you talking about?" I pulled out the trust documents that established Morrison Heritage Properties as the chapel's legal owner and slid copies across the table to each board member. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to inform you that Heritage Valley Chapel is owned by my family trust and has been for 15 years. The room fell silent, except for the sound of rustling papers as the board members read through the ownership documents. Linda's face went white as she realized the implications of what I just revealed. "Furthermore," I continued, "I have evidence that Mrs. Blackwood has been using her position on this board to eliminate business competition while personally profiting from the chapel's monopoly on local weddings. She's been abusing her HOA presidency to drive business to a venue where she has direct financial interests." I pulled out recordings of Linda's threats to my vendors, copies of her false reports to county officials, and documentation of her attempts to manipulate chapel board decisions for personal gain. This is a clear violation of both her HOA fiduciary duties and her responsibilities to this board. Mrs. Blackwood has been using her positions of trust to wage a personal vendetta against my family while financially benefiting from the destruction she's caused. Linda finally found her voice, but it came out as a strangled whisper. "You can't prove any of that. This is revenge because I tried to protect the community from your inappropriate wedding." That's when I played the recording of her conversation with Sarah, where Linda had explicitly admitted that her opposition was about protecting the chapel's business interests rather than legitimate community concerns. The other board members were looking at Linda with expressions ranging from shock to disgust. They'd been manipulated into supporting her schemes without understanding her true motivations. James Mitchell was the first to speak. "Mrs. Blackwood, if these allegations are accurate, you've placed this entire organization in legal jeopardy. Using your board position for personal financial gain is not only unethical, it could expose us to criminal liability." Phase 2 of my revenge began that afternoon, when I exercised my rights as the chapel's owner to call for an emergency review of all board positions and recent decisions. Within 24 hours, Linda Blackwood was removed from the Heritage Valley Chapel Board by a unanimous vote of no confidence. Her contracts for marketing services were terminated immediately, and the chapel issued a public statement distancing itself from her anti-competitive practices. But the real satisfaction came when I announced the chapel's new policy regarding local wedding venues. Effective immediately, I told the reconstituted board, Heritage Valley Chapel will actively support and promote all legitimate wedding venues in our community. Competition makes everyone better, and couples deserve choices when planning their celebrations. The chapel would now refer overflow clients to my ranch and other local venues, turning Linda's attempt to eliminate competition into a collaborative network that benefited everyone except her. Phase 3 launched when Rebecca Torres filed criminal charges against Linda for perjury, filing false reports, and abuse of office. The evidence was overwhelming, and the district attorney's office moved quickly once they saw the pattern of corruption. Linda was arrested at her house on a Tuesday morning, led away in handcuffs, while her neighbors watched from their perfectly manicured lawns. The woman who'd terrorized the community for years was finally facing consequences for her actions. But Phase 4 delivered the most poetic justice of all. The new HOA board, elected after Linda's arrest, voted unanimously to not only approve my wedding, but to declare it an official community celebration. They issued a formal apology for Linda's harassment and offered to help promote the event as an example of what the neighborhood could accomplish when people work together. My wedding became the social event of the season, with the entire community rallying to make it special. Neighbors who'd been intimidated by Linda for years came forward to offer help with decorations, parking, and logistics. The local newspaper covered the story as a triumph of justice over corruption, featuring photos of our beautiful ranch ceremony and interviews with community members who praised the collaborative spirit that had emerged after Linda's departure. But the sweetest revenge came on the morning of my wedding, when Linda made one final desperate attempt to destroy our celebration. She showed up at the ranch with a sheriff's deputy and that manila folder full of fabricated violations, trying to have our wedding arrested even though she no longer had any legal authority to do so. Officer Martinez looked embarrassed as Linda read her list of imaginary violations. When she finished her performance, I calmly pulled out my phone and showed him the text message I just received from the new HOA president. "David, please have the most beautiful wedding ever. Linda Blackwood no longer speaks for this community." Jim Patterson, HOA president. "Ma'am," Officer Martinez told Linda, "I'm going to need you to leave this property immediately. You have no legal standing to disrupt this event, and if you don't leave voluntarily, I'll have to arrest you for trespassing." Linda's face crumpled as she realized her final gambit had failed. The woman who'd spent months trying to destroy my wedding was being escorted off my property by the same law enforcement she'd tried to weaponize against me. As her car disappeared down my driveway, I took Sarah's hand and smiled. Ready to get married? Our wedding was everything we'd dreamed of and more. 300 guests celebrated under the oak trees, where my grandfather had taught me about family, legacy, and standing up for what's right. The barn provided perfect acoustics for our country band, and the pasture looked magical in the golden hour light. During my toast, I thanked everyone for supporting us through the challenges of the past months. Sarah and I learned that our community isn't defined by the people who try to divide us, but by the neighbors who stand together when it matters most. Linda Blackwood had tried to destroy our wedding to protect her own interests. Instead, she'd brought our community closer together and ensured that our celebration would be remembered as a symbol of justice triumphing over corruption. The aftermath of Linda Blackwood's downfall rippled through Millbrook Valley like stones thrown into still water, creating changes that would benefit the community for years to come. What started as her campaign to destroy my wedding ended up reforming how the entire neighborhood approached governance and cooperation. The criminal charges against Linda moved through the court system with surprising speed. Faced with overwhelming evidence of perjury, filing false reports, and abuse of office, she pleaded guilty to avoid trial and received 18 months of probation along with 300 hours of community service. The irony was perfect. Linda Blackwood, who'd terrorized neighbors for years in the name of community standards, was sentenced to spend her weekends cleaning up the very parks and public spaces she'd claimed to protect. Linda's house went on the market within 3 months of her conviction. She and her husband moved to another state, presumably to start over somewhere their reputation hadn't preceded them. The local real estate agent told me their asking price dropped 4 times before they found a buyer. The new HOA board, led by Jim Patterson, implemented sweeping reforms that transformed Millbrook Estates from Linda's personal kingdom into a genuinely collaborative community. They repealed her oppressive regulations, established transparent decision-making processes, and created resident committees to handle different aspects of neighborhood life. My ranch wedding became the template for a new approach to community events. Instead of viewing celebrations as problems to be regulated, the HOA began promoting them as opportunities to bring neighbors together. The community calendar filled up with barn dances, outdoor concerts, and seasonal festivals that strengthened the bonds Linda had tried so hard to control. Heritage Valley Chapel experienced its own renaissance after Linda's departure. Under new management, it became a hub for wedding industry cooperation rather than competition. My ranch joined a network of local venues that referred clients to each other based on couples' specific needs and preferences. The chapel's Community Wedding Alliance grew to include 6 different venues, each offering unique settings and specialties. Couples could choose from rustic ranch celebrations, elegant garden parties, traditional church ceremonies, or modern industrial settings, all supported by a collaborative network of vendors and venues. But the most meaningful change was personal. Sarah and I decided to make our ranch available for other couples who wanted outdoor weddings, but couldn't afford expensive venues. We created a nonprofit program that provided beautiful, affordable celebrations for military families, teachers, and first responders. Every month, we hosted a wedding for a couple who might not otherwise be able to afford their dream celebration. The community rallied around each event, with neighbors volunteering time, local businesses donating services, and everyone contributing to making each couple's day special. These community weddings became legendary in Millbrook Valley. Photographers competed to donate their services, caterers created special menus, and local musicians formed a volunteer wedding band that played for free. What Linda had tried to stop became a movement that brought out the best in everyone. The ranch itself became a symbol of what's possible when people choose cooperation over control. My grandfather's pastures hosted celebrations that ranged from intimate elopements to elaborate receptions, each one proving that beauty comes from authenticity rather than rigid rules. 6 months after our wedding, I received a letter that made everything worthwhile. It was from a young teacher named Maria Santos, whose ranch wedding we'd hosted the previous month. "Mr. Morrison, I wanted you to know that our wedding was the most beautiful day of our lives. But more than that, it showed us what a real community looks like. Your neighbors didn't just attend our wedding, they made it their own celebration. This is what Mrs. Blackwood could never understand. Real community standards aren't about rules and restrictions. They're about lifting each other up and sharing joy." Maria was right. Linda Blackwood had spent years trying to create community through control, fear, and exclusion. What she'd accomplished instead was showing everyone the opposite approach, building community through generosity, collaboration, and inclusion. The wedding industry changes we sparked spread beyond Millbrook Valley. Other communities adopted our collaborative model, creating venue networks that prioritized couples' needs over competitive jealousy. Wedding magazines featured stories about the Millbrook method of community-supported celebrations. Linda Blackwood had tried to protect her business interests by destroying mine. Instead, she'd inspired innovations that made the entire industry more cooperative and couple-friendly. Last month, I received an unexpected phone call from James Mitchell at Heritage Valley Chapel. "David, you're not going to believe this. We just got a request for a wedding booking from someone claiming to be Linda Blackwood's daughter. She wants to get married here next spring." I thought about Linda's daughter, probably planning the most important day of her life while carrying the weight of her mother's reputation. James, I hope you told her yes. Everyone deserves a beautiful wedding, regardless of their family history. Actually, she specifically asked if she could have her reception at your ranch afterward. She said she wanted to support the community her mother had hurt. That's when I knew Linda Blackwood's legacy had been completely transformed. Her attempts to divide our community had instead taught us the value of forgiveness, cooperation, and giving everyone a chance to create something beautiful. Our ranch continues to host weddings every few weeks, each one unique, but all sharing the spirit of community celebration that Linda tried so hard to destroy. The Oak Grove, where my grandfather taught me to ride horses, now witnesses dozens of couples starting their own family legacies. Sometimes, during the quiet moments after a wedding reception has ended and the last guests have gone home, I sit on the front porch and think about how dramatically everything changed. Linda Blackwood declared war on my family's celebration and ended up creating a movement that brings joy to hundreds of couples every year. She thought she was protecting her territory by eliminating competition. Instead, she taught us all that the best protection comes from building something so beautiful and meaningful that it lifts up everyone around it. But Linda Blackwood wasn't the only person who learned not to underestimate the power of community cooperation. There's the story of the commercial developer who tried to buy out our wedding venue network, and the city councilwoman who attempted to zone our ranches out of existence. Both of them discovered that some battles create more enemies than victories, especially when you're fighting against people who've learned to stand together.